The AmericasDemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, is made possible by contributions from our listeners. Want to do more? Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click Donate. And thank you for allowing us to be your voice. This is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. With Russia this and Russia that, Republican former Ambassador Mike Ussery says Europe should be getting more attention from foreign policy planners. Labor economist Theresa Ghilarducci says Social Security isn't in bad shape, but she has a plan for retirement insurance for everyone. And Bill Press talks with Joe Cirincione about, what else? Russia. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Mike Ussery, a Republican foreign policy expert, believes Secretary of State Rex Tillerson can separate himself from his oil industry background and deal squarely with Russia. And we say hello to Mike Ussery, former ambassador to Morocco under Presidents Reagan and Bush. He is a veteran of presidential campaigns, including the 1988 Bush-Quayle campaign and 2000 Bush-Cheney campaign. Since serving as U.S. ambassador, he has an international business career and is a founder of several international companies and nonprofit organizations. Mike Ussery, thank you so much, as always, for joining us today on AmericasDemocrats.org.
Great to be back with you, Jim. Thank you.
And always nice to speak with you, too, Mike. So you served, as I mentioned, but almost 12 years in the State Department for Republican presidents. How do you see Rex Tillerson as Secretary of State, and what about criticisms of his friendship with Putin and other U.S. adversaries, autocrats, and monarchs?
Well, I'm intrigued at first with the entire cabinet. This different mix, different kind of backgrounds, and even though one of the main concerns across the board is lack of federal government experience, I'm game to see what very successful people do to these jobs. I think they'll learn them fast. Nobody, is learning faster than Secretary Tillerson. He's just got a great. I think he's got a great career. I believe he's going to be able to do things. I'm not worried about the argument, the conflict or the weight of a relationship with Putin or anything like that. In fact, I think when we look around the world and you talk about businessmen who become, quote, friends with foreign leaders, I'm not sure those are what we'd call real friendships back home here. And I believe he has no problem in just turning the switch and looking at the world from the way he should be, from a White House viewpoint, looking at it as the totally committed Secretary of State. And, maybe it's a really bad analogy, but, people do switch from companies to other companies in America, competing companies. Somebody can switch from the Philadelphia Eagles to the Washington Redskins and bye-bye to the other side and bye-bye to the past. And so I'm thinking no special treatment for Exxon or oil under the specter of our, new Secretary of State.
Trump policies.
Let's give it a shot. Let's see where it goes.
We don't have much choice, right?
Well, I'm saying I'm encouraging all to hold back, positively hold back some of those judgments, and let's see what happens. And I think the ability and the potential to be a great Secretary of State's there. I served under Secretary George Shultz. George Shultz had been the labor secretary, Secretary of Labor for Ford, and then he'd been an economist. Then he became Secretary of State, but he came straight out of the private sector, and I do believe he brought a lot of skill sets, including private sector leadership and management, that served him brilliantly at State Department for President Reagan.
Okay. Now, Trump policies. Are you concerned that they'll weaken NATO and the EU and hurt our European relationships and Ukraine?
I'm concerned about what we're going to do since I don't think it was made really clear during the campaign. There are things that we've been told that President Trump will do in terms of NATO and shape it up, and it was said, I think, in a negative way. It was more about raising budgets and putting pressure on individual members. But I think if we end up really going forward with the Pentagon Secretary and the whole team, and including the Secretary of State and the President, looking at NATO as something that needs to be rebuilt, that could be, and maybe unfortunate to say this right now, more important than it's been since the Iraq Gulf War. So if we build it up right, and all this is to be seen, okay. But if we just take a viewpoint of viewing it as somewhat obsolete and declining, and then we just pound on that, then we're going to end up regretting the damage we're going to do permanently to NATO. I do have concerns that there's so much needs to be focused on Russia and China. That's a positive development. Can't ignore the Mideast. I know we'll talk some more about that. But I am concerned. I've yet to see that we're going to be as engaged with our European allies as I hope we should. And that goes back to your part about NATO. I mean, the way you build up NATO, the way you build up the U.S.-European relationship is through individual member countries and the ones that have been our allies. And we've just got to continue doing that. But I agree, the verdict's out.
Now, and you mentioned the Middle East. Where is the Middle East heading after these last couple of decades of chaos? And how big a factor will Trump be in shaping or perhaps reshaping the region?
Well, it's a great question, and it's a big, broad question. I think the Mideast, and there's no finger pointed as I say this, the Mideast is in chaos for so many different reasons and factors, and it even goes before. It goes back into the last century, and I mean the big movement of Islamists and Islamist power out in the region. That's not any one single act. It's not just a reaction to what the West has done. It's been there. It's been building up for generations, and we've got so many countries that are in weaker states in the Middle East than they were, say, 15 years ago, certainly 20 years ago. So how you put it, it's almost, if you look at it as putting Humpty Dumpty back together again, nobody's going to be able to do that. You have to really break it down into many, many issues. Yet so many of them tie together, and you can't just say, okay, I'm going to work on Syria and Assad, but ISIS is another issue, and what's happening in Iraq is another issue. Everything's linked. And so how big a role Donald Trump plays is going to be challenging. It's going to be challenging for anybody to get in there. It is a region of the world that works it needs master plans, and it works so much on nuances and inferences, delicate touches. So I'm not optimistic about where we're going to go. I believe there are ways that we can make improvements, in some cases do more containment of problems or damage, and see where that goes, try to take care of our own interests more tighter in terms of how it all looks towards possible terrorism coming in from the outside. But as a whole, I'm just not an optimist, and I don't know that the U.S. can do as much, regardless of the leadership it brings to it. I don't think we can do as much as we could do in that region and move in that region in the 1990s, really.
We're speaking with Mike Ussery, former ambassador to Morocco under Presidents Reagan and Bush. Of course, he also has enjoyed an international business career and is founder of several international companies and nonprofit organizations. Mike, do you see Trump as being able to destroy ISIS, and at what cost and consequences, including a possible bigger regional role for Putin?
Well, ISIS needs to be destroyed, at least, we can't, maybe it'll break up even if it's driven out of its headquarters and its operations out of the Mideast today, and it can be and it should be. how that's done, well, I'm going to let the military people hopefully guide the president on that. But what I do know is I want it done as a coalition, and that worked beautifully back with the Iraq War, the Gulf War back 25 years ago. And I thought we always had developed a model of cooperation for that region among moderate Arabs, particularly the Sunni Arabs. And I think that's got to be there. Something you've asked me about, again, I think the Europeans and NATO, I really rather it be seen as something of a world campaign, a world conflict that can be done quickly and effectively and smartly. And smartly includes the very important role of Sunni Arabs in there once ISIS is driven out and part of driving them out. But putting that together is going to be a big undertaking. Anything that's called quick is going to be leaving a lot of assets or a lot of possible partners off the battleground, and we don't want that. I think we're going to see problems too if we keep talking of this. Even though I said I'm a friend of Israel, if we keep talking about maybe moving our embassy to Jerusalem, we're just, as I said in other matters, things are so linked over there. And if we keep talking about tones about what Gulf Arabs should be paying us to protect them, we're just not going to get that coalition put together right. But yes, ISIS can be destroyed. I don't know that we can destroy the seed idea. There's just so many people feeling disenfranchised in the region, so many people who've gone to another dark place, and I think we'll be living with that and dealing with those issues for generations.
Do you see Trump and the Republican Congress trying to cut ties with the United Nations?
I think they're going to try to make some hits on the United Nations. They're going to, I don't see us withdrawing from the United Nations, but I really think that the attitude's so negative about the United Nations, and nobody helped put themselves in a bigger hole than the United Nations has managed to do over decades. I think the UN is going to either see some real budget cuts and some real disengagement from the U.S., or if we do get engaged, that's going to mean getting in a way of some real serious restructuring. Probably the United Nations would hope they don't see come out of the U.S. But yeah, I think we're going to have a tough attitude towards the United Nations. But to me, I don't lose sleep about the United Nations. I think they've managed to make themselves almost irrelevant for quite a while, regardless of who was in the White House in Washington. The UN's just gone down its own track, its own way. It's become a place of complaints and gripes, but very little solved. And I can think of issues and things from East Africa and Somaliland to the Western Sahara to refugee issues. I just can't tell you what the UN Secretary General's accomplished. I can't think of it, and I certainly wouldn't think the UN can sit back and be proud of any contribution it might think it made in Syria. It just didn't.
All right, let's move further east. What do you expect will happen on U.S. relations with China and across the region, including the Koreas, Japan, and Vietnam?
Well, it's going to be one of the new really great challenge regions because of Mideast and other matters. We really didn't do what was a great, noble idea, a very savvy idea from President Obama to really pivot towards Asia. The Chinese have been developing by leaps and bounds in many ways, even though the last few years their economy's gone down, and they're learning the hard way. They can't just manipulate the stock market and currency and fix all their problems. So I think we're going to have a big challenge, and I think it needs to be looked at as a holistic kind of policy. And so holistic, both in the sense of multiple issues between the U.S. and China. So it's not where we want to pick a scab one day on one issue with China or poke them in the eye on another. We've got to really have a strategy or how we're trying to engage China going forward. Try to make it a real bilateral cooperative arrangement, even though there are going to be plenty of disagreements, things that people are going to be working on. The toughest was be in the South China Sea. I do think we're going to see Singapore, Malaysia, Vietnam, Philippines, and maybe others, Thailand, maybe Cambodia, try to come together and act more regionally with the mutual fear they all have about China. And I think we're going to probably see more of a political effort, a more active one by those countries in Washington. And not to mention up in the northern parts with Japan and Korea, who see so much at stake, where the U.S. is right now and where China is, and China affecting the everyday lives of these countries, and everybody worried about North Korea. So let's just hope there's a holistic approach. You just can't look at all that we're talking about in East Asia and South Asia and put them down as a list of 25 issues and say, let's work on number 9 and 15 today. It really does have to be a full package, and it's going to be, there are not going to be any quick solutions. We can make quick mistakes, but we can't make quick solutions.
Okay. Mike Ussery, former ambassador to Morocco under Presidents Reagan and Bush, of course, regular contributor here as our Republican voice, if you will, on AmericasDemocrats.org. Mike, as always, it was great speaking with you, and we do wish to have you back again soon.
Thank you, and all best wishes this year, Jim, to you and your listeners.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mike. And this is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen to this AmericasDemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats. But we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.
Social Security measure. I believe that we must pass legislation to provide medical care.
This is our tradition. When our grandparents came to America, it was the Democratic Party which said, welcome. It was the Democratic Party, the party of Roosevelt and Truman and Kennedy and others, who said that America belonged to all its people, not just a handful of the rich or a few giant corporations. That's why great leaders like FDR fought so hard for Social Security, and why JFK stood up to the insurance companies and their Republican allies to get Medicare. It's not just one thing, or one time, in one place. It's about a whole history of standing up to the Republicans and saying someone has to be on the side of regular working people in America, whether it's defending Social Security or just the way your loved ones are treated on the job. That's what the Democratic Party is all about. And that's why this message has been brought to you by the Democratic Party. Working people like you and me.
Paid for by 21st Century Democrats. Not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee. This is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Labor economist Theresa Ghilarducci tells older folks to delay taking Social Security benefits until they're 70, and they'll reap a 6 to 8% return forever. More on that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
Trump and company claim to have a sweeping mandate from voters. But wait, almost half of the electorate chose not to vote last November. Only 25% of voters actually cast their ballots for Trump. 26% chose Clinton. 60% of those who did vote for Trump said they don't trust him. Some mandate. Here's another fact. Those of us fighting for populist justice are stronger than we've been in decades. But how can that be, since Trump is in the White House? Because the vast majority of people agree with the ideals and ideas of progressive populism, not with Trumpism. Even most of his supporters were not voting for what they're about to get, a plutocratic, autocratic agenda that'll steamroll the working class and poor. Trump was not elected on issues, but on anger. A lot of Trump voters simply heard him speaking one truth repeatedly. The system is rigged by and for the elites. That's true. So the riggees furious at being flattened by the corporate and political powers, saw Trump as a big bodark stick that they could grab to thump the whole smug establishment upside its collective head. However, far from alleviating their anger and despair, Trump is already betraying them, as revealed by the actual proposals he's making and the people he's brought inside the White House. Remember his promise to drain the swamp in Washington? Instead, he's filled it with a new slew of creepy, crawly swamp creatures like Jeff Sessions, Steve Mnuchin, Rex Tillerson, Tom Price, Scott Pruitt, Betsy DeVos, and a mess of Wall Street insiders. These are career-long corporate hacks, not working-class champions. This is Jim Hightower saying, progressives not only need to resist the plutocratic agenda of these fraudsters, but also to put forth our true people's agenda and start rallying voters around it right now.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Theresa Ghilarducci, an expert in the economics of retirement, has an idea for establishing pensions for everyone. In the meantime, she's telling people to delay taking Social Security benefits until age 70. And we say hello to Theresa Ghilarducci, a labor economist and nationally recognized expert in retirement security. She is the Bernard L. and Irene Schwartz Professor of Economics at the New School for Social Research and co-author of a new book, along with Tony James, Rescuing Retirement, a Plan to Guarantee Retirement Security for All Americans. Theresa Ghilarducci, thanks so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Happy to do so.
And we're glad to have you with us as well. You know, one of the biggest fears that the average working American has is whether they'll have enough money to retire on. How legitimate is that concern?
Well, under our system, where people actually have to figure out what the right number is. So people are really worried about the number, how much money they should have on top of Social Security, to live comfortably for the rest of their life. And many people don't have that number. So let me give you some statistics. The number for an average worker is probably 8 times their annual salary. So if you are living at a lifestyle of, say, $50,000 per year, and you want to maintain that lifestyle throughout your retirement, you're going to need, 50 times 8 or $400,000 on top of Social Security to live comfortably, to have enough money. So if you do it right, you die the day, your last penny drains from your bank account. So the other way to think about what that gap, what people have, which is on average about $14,000 versus the $400,000 they should have, the way to think about the consequences of that gap is that people are going to have to ratchet down their living standards. So we're looking at a lot of middle class or lower middle class retirees looking forward to a life of near poverty, like twice the poverty rate. So to answer your question, that bottom line question, how legitimate is the anxiety about not having enough retirement? It's very legitimate. The gap between what they need and what they have is growing.
It's sobering to hear those numbers, the 14,000 to 400,000. I mean, that's just mind-boggling.
Yeah.
And every day we got 10,000 Americans reaching the age of retirement. How many will actually be able to retire today with any kind of security?
Yeah, so if you divide up those Americans by, the bottom 50%, the middle 40%, and the top 10%, which is really sort of the most meaningful way to figure out the differences in inequality we have among workers, we're finding out that the bottom 50% will rely on Social Security. And they will be getting about, $12,000, $13,000 a year. So half of Americans reaching that age will only have Social Security, and that will bring them a little bit over the poverty line. The middle 40%, probably about half of them will have enough with their house paid off and enough in their IRAs and the 401ks and even their traditional pensions, because people are still retiring with a defined benefit system. That's not going to be true for people, who are now in their 40s. And about half of middle class people will have some security, and then the top 10% are going to be just fine.
Mm. We're speaking with Theresa Ghilarducci, labor economist, nationally recognized expert in retirement security, and she's got a new book co-authored with Tony James, Rescuing Retirement. The United States is far behind other Western countries in making sure retirees have pensions. You have a plan to help American workers achieve a more stable retirement. What is it?
Yeah, so our plan isn't mimicking some European, or Australian model, even though there's aspects of the plan that look like those successful plans. I'm dying to tell you why we're so far behind, but I'm going to resist, and I'll tell you what we plan looking forward. Tony James, my co-author, very unlikely co-author, he's a big banker, and I agree that the current system is broken. We agree that the current system doesn't help a worker from the beginning of their career all the way throughout their career save enough for retirement. We agree that the system doesn't let people, even if they did save enough, invest it in a way that they're protected against predators, high retail fees, or inappropriate portfolios. And we also agree that the system, even if you invested it well and accumulated enough, there's no way for an American to turn that lump sum into a guaranteed annuity for the rest of their life. So our plan closes the flaws or corrects the flaws in all three of those elements of a good pension system. We would require that everybody, as soon as they start paying their Social Security tax, also saves for their own retirement on top of a Social Security system. That probably will have to be expanded because even the floor of Social Security has eroded over time. We need to shore that up, and on top of that, basically give to everyone what about half of the lucky workers have, which is a pension plan at work. Half of Americans don't have anything at work. So we would require all employers to sponsor a pension plan. And if it sounds like universal health insurance, it's meant to. It's universal pension insurance. So on top of their workers and their employers would contribute to their pension plan. It would be invested in a diverse portfolio managed by by trustees who would hire the professionals. This is what public sector workers have: teachers, police and fire workers, state and local workers, and workers in big company plans like the United Auto Workers and other such big corporate defined benefit plans. And then when they retire, most of that money converted into an annuity and would supplement the Social Security. So in some ways, our plan mimics some of the best plans in America, but extends it to everybody. Mm-hmm. And it's called the Guaranteed Retirement Account Plan.
Now, another thing about your plan, that you say it doesn't add to the deficit, doesn't raise taxes, or create a new government infrastructure, so that really should appeal to Republicans. Are you getting any sort of pushback?
So we have talked to Republicans and Democrats. Democrats are more likely interested in the bottom 90%. But Republicans are too, because Republicans are governors and they're also mayors of a lot of cities. So our best traction aren't the folks in Washington, but the legislators all across the country who know when half of those 10,000 Americans reach their cities, their rural areas, or their states, they're going to be dependent upon local and state resources. So we get the attention of everybody at the local level when we say that we have a retirement crisis. In your city, there are going to be more poor elderly people than you've seen since before Social Security was passed, and they're going to demand food subsidies, housing subsidies, and be on the Medicaid rolls. And so I'm getting lots of attention at the local level. And some senators who are Republicans who care about votes, they care about actually the health of their districts, also are very, very keenly attentive to any solution to stop poverty among the elderly. The dynamics of their support are going to be different than the dynamics of the support for Democrats. But one of the reasons why it wasn't a issue in the presidential election is because there's a lot of bipartisan agreement on the problem.
That's the kind of thing we need. I mean, let's pick something. Let's get something going that everyone can agree on, and then we can continue to move forward that way.
Yeah, I mean, if everyone can agree on a problem, if it actually affects everybody, at the same, affects everybody similarly, and so the fact that Republicans, have so much responsibility at the state and local level. They're going to feel the pain. Also, it's so tangible. If you know people like your relatives or your neighbors that come into retirement, and these aren't the very poor. Most of us don't know the very poor, but but all of us know people who have worked their whole life, got a bad break maybe in the investment of their 401k, had a couple of had wiggles in the labor market. They either were out of work for a year or their pay fell and weren't able to contribute. Like everybody, Republican or Democrats, know people with income insecurity. And that income insecurity in your working life magnifies into this really tragic way when you're old and not having enough money, because when you're old, there aren't very many exit ramps. There's not a lot of jobs you can get that will improve your health. I mean, if you do work when you're old in order to make ends meet, you probably will harm your health. And there's a lot of isolation. I get pretty emotional about this, actually. Because when you're 70 and 80 and your income is falling, you're likely to be alone. And we're just seeing lots of consequences in terms of depression.
Well, and also you're typically in need of more help at that point in your life too. So it's really kind of a perfect storm.
And if I can continue, just with my right brain, rather than my left brain, just on the emotional part of it, the system is set up to also nurture a self-blame. So if you're there alone and you don't have enough money because you were supposed to save during your working years, people can have a tendency to blame themselves, and that makes things much worse in terms of being able to seek help and actually being involved politically, and also to write your depression. So it's a retirement crisis, beyond the parameters of not having enough wealth or income.
We're speaking with Theresa Ghilarducci, labor economist, and also author, and she's got a new book along with Tony James, Rescuing Retirement, a plan to guarantee retirement security for all Americans. Theresa, a few moments ago, you mentioned the erosion of Social Security at the base. Is it really solvent? And if not, how do we make it stronger?
Yeah. So let me just do some Social Security 101, if you and your listeners will permit me.
Of course.
Right now, everybody, Republicans and Democrats, agree on the numbers, which is amazing for a big government program. The actuaries tell us that if the payroll taxes were raised now from its 12.4% shared equally between the employer and the employee, if the employee paid 1 or a little bit more, and the employer paid another 1%, a little bit more. It changes every year, but basically 2%. The system would pay scheduled benefits for the next 75 years. Right now, because we need to raise the FICA tax another 2%, the system is only scheduled to pay 3/4 of promised benefits starting about 2034. So right now, we could make the system solvent for 75 years by just raising the FICA tax. And given the experiment we did the last 8 years, where we got rid of the FICA tax and then we added it back on, that was part of the policies to recover from the great financial crash, and nobody noticed, and employment still increased. Most economists think that increase in FICA tax won't hurt job demand. The other alternative to that, if you don't want to just raise the payroll tax to make it solvent, is to tweak it a bit and raise the FICA tax maybe 0.5% for the employer and the employee, and then raise the earnings base from which the taxes are collected. Right now, we stopped collecting tax. It's about $125,000 per year. So if you're in the top 10%, you may earn $125,000. Well, for the very richest, the day after their hangover, is healed from the, from their New Year's Eve party.
Sure.
Or April or May or June. There are many people who are very wealthy stop paying Social Security tax somewhere along the year. If we just made everybody pay their FICA tax for the Social Security for the entire year, we wouldn't have to raise the payroll tax that much. So just bringing in more revenue by raising the FICA tax and raising the cap would make the system solvent for the next 75 years, and without any detrimental effect on the economy. So that's my definition of a really sound system with a really easy fix.
I mean, it makes a lot of sense. Now, here's something. Older workers. What would you tell older workers as to when they should apply to collect Social Security? Yeah,
it's actually one of the most important, I think, services that you and I are doing here on the radio is the public service announcement. Most people think they're going to die sooner than they actually will. Let me just say that again. Most people are pessimistic about their life expectancy. Life expectancy is increasing for people over 65. Also, people who don't have enough money have a cognitive dissonance and believe they'll make it, by dying early. So just all you listeners realize that you're going to probably live, to past your 80s. That means if you delay collecting Social Security and don't collect it at the earliest age you can collect it at 62, your Social Security check will go up between 6 3/4 and 8% if you delay collecting all the way to 70 for the rest of your life and for the rest of your survivor's life. It's the only place on the planet you can get a 6 to 8% return guarantee. Now, there are many people who can't escape poverty without collecting their Social Security at 62. And so every case is a little bit different, but over 50% of people collect between 62 and 65. And we know that they could get by if they delayed it. So my recommendation is to delay collecting Social Security, and if you have any money in your 401k and IRA, spend that down fast so that you can delay collecting Social Security.
All right. Now,
was that clear?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. Before we let you go, presidential election brings us a new administration. Where is reform for the pension system as a result of that election? Do you see it happening?
The presidential election did not change the math of the retirement crisis. Whether or not the president and Congress have pension reform will depend upon the grassroots. It will depend upon voices coming up from Republican governors and Democratic governors, from state legislatures, from mayors, to say, hey, Washington, we're going to have a crisis that will look like the pre-Social Security crisis, and we need as bold action as Social Security was to fix it. Since the math hasn't changed and people's anxiety about retirement hasn't changed, I think we can move Congress and the president.
Okay. Well, those are encouraging words. Theresa Ghilarducci, labor economist, nationally recognized expert in retirement security. And she's got a new book, co-authored a new book along with Tony James, Rescuing Retirement, a plan to guarantee retirement security for all Americans. Theresa, thank you so much for your time with us today on americasdemocrats.org. We do look forward to having you back again soon.
It was a pleasure. These were great questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to keep the AmericasDemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, on the air, and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now Bill Press talks with Joe Cirincione of the Plowshares Fund.
From the Plowshares Fund. Hello, Joseph.
Good morning, Bill.
Let's talk a little bit about Russia. Well, first of all, about the Muslim ban. So we know the first Muslim ban created a lot of commotion, did a lot of harm to a lot of people, but didn't pass muster in the courts. So now they're coming up with this second one, which they've delayed, so the president gets a little more bounce from his address to Congress. Yes. And there's the reports were yesterday that they're going to drop Iraq from these 7 countries. Is that what you're hearing?
Yes, that's what I'm hearing. And that is actually, that's a very good thing. Doesn't fix all the problems, but that is a good thing. Why? Because this was completely demoralizing to the Iraqis that we're fighting alongside of. People we're depending on.
Yeah.
You know, soldiers, translators, officials, people who have relatives here in the United States were planning to come. This ban would stop them from coming. People who were planning to emigrate to the United States, this ban would have stopped them from coming. It's a slap in the face. It's saying you're not worthy of coming. And, of course, it proves the ISIS point. These people, America hates you. America hates you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and that's one of the real national security consequences of this kind of ban. It gives ISIS a huge propaganda windfall.
Yesterday, or maybe it was the day before, General Mattis, Defense Secretary, dropped off at the White House the copy of the plan to defeat ISIS that the president had asked for.
This is not the Trump secret plan.
No, not right.
That's right.
He had a secret plan that was better than the general's plan.
Yeah.
He said during the campaign.
Yeah.
Which of course he would not tell us because it was secret.
That's right.
And he didn't want anybody to know.
Can't let that get
So then the first thing he does is he goes to the Pentagon. He asks General Mattis to prepare a plan and give it to me within a month. And now, so we were told that the plan's been delivered. We haven't heard anything about it since.
No.
I mean, what? So I know you haven't seen it either, but what are the options, really, do you think? I mean,
well, he didn't talk about it in his address to Congress. It's one of the many things that were missing. You notice foreign policy was largely missing. He never mentioned the words Russia or Syria.
Or North Korea.
Never mentioned them. The
right.
actual crises we face.
No.
He's talking about the threat from immigrants.
Well, wait a minute.
Yeah.
He said the 3 words, radical Islamic terrorism. So that's it? That's all you need to do?
That's all you need to do. That's all Obama ever needed to do. That's all Trump needed to do.
So that just saying those 3 words solves the problem.
So your options are, number one, just keep doing what we're doing, which is, by the way, working. We're defeating ISIS. I mean, ISIS has been steadily rolled back. We're now in the process of liberating the western Mosul. So that's option number 1.
Right.
Option number 2, you be more aggressive. The Yemen raid is an example of that. So
because that worked out so well.
It was a terrible tragedy, a botched raid that should have been vetted much more thoroughly. You've seen the stories. He handled it in a half an hour over dinner.
Gained us nothing.
Nothing.
Except the loss of a Navy SEAL and a helicopter.
Which was grotesquely exploited in the address. One of the more disgusting parts of that address was how he manipulated the widow of Ryan Owens. Just deplorable.
Again, tragic loss of a brave Navy SEAL and a huge loss for her and the rest of his family.
Yeah.
But
this kind of raids are the kinds of thing you could do more if you could be more aggressive. So that you could increase the role of the U.S. military in some of the combat operations, putting more in with the Iraqi army, for example, or these kinds of raids in Yemen. This was a joint raid with the Emirati commandos, so from the United Arab Emirates. So you could increase that. You could order more drone strikes. You could order more bombing. When you do that, you're going to get more civilian casualties. So there's downsides to that. But those are the range of options you have.
Ground troops.
Well, that would be at the extreme, is bringing tens of thousands of more troops. I can't believe Mattis is going to recommend that. I don't think anybody in the Joint Chiefs wants to see the introduction of tens of thousands of troops back to the Middle East.
Yeah. Well, the general may not, but we don't know.
May not.
We don't know what the commander-in-chief
right, so
might
if it's a
wanna
fair
do.
option, I mean, that would be one of the, if you're going to be fair, that would be an option. You wouldn't recommend it, but it would be there.
Yeah, but we've seen, on several fronts. For example, on the radical Islamic terrorism, McMaster's, General McMaster's had an all-hands-on-deck briefing with his staff at DHS, right?
Yeah. No, NSC.
Right.
National Security Council.
National Security Council. And said this is we should not be using this phrase. It's an inflammatory phrase. I don't like it.
It feeds into ISIS propaganda.
Right. Then when he heard that the president might say it in the State of the Union, he urges them, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And notice, Donald Trump not only said those 3 words, he made sure that everybody understood, in your face, baby, radical Islamic terrorism.
Right, he does. And then what does his weird little aide, Sebastian Gorka, do?
Oh, let me tell you, this guy.
Yeah.
He sends out a tweet, all caps, radical Islamic terrorism, ! Any questions?
Yeah.
Like, I won. This is
right.
Because he's a real Islamic phobe.
Yeah.
It's now deleted, but of course you can't really delete.
Nothing's ever deleted.
On Twitter. And so you see that the National Security Advisor has his own problems with his own staff contradicting him, thinking that they speak for the president and they can do whatever they want.
Yeah. So we'll see what comes out of this. I assume whenever they talk about it again, and with Russia, we talked earlier about, now we know that Senator Sessions was talking with the ambassador, not just Michael Flynn. But
great job reporting that earlier in the show, though. By the way you laid that out, the tapes you guys got were just brilliant on what Sessions had to say.
Jamie, he's up all night.
He's up all night working it. Nice work, Jamie.
Something like that.
But this Russian connection story is not going to go away.
No, it's not going to go away. And every once in a while you think it is. You don't hear about it for a few days. Something else happens. The master salesman is out there with a sparkly new object.
Right.
But it won't go away. And this Sessions thing is actually unbelievable.
It really is.
Have you ever met Ambassador Kislyak?
No, I haven't.
He's a very big man. I mean, he's not big like Peter. He's big like Santa Claus. This is not a guy you forget.
Yeah.
Really?
If he's
I've seen photos of this guy, and he is a large dude.
He's got a large personality, and you're not going to forget meeting him at the Republican National Congress. If he comes to your office,
or in his office, right.
You and all your staff are going to know he's there.
Well, I mean, for the Russian ambassador to come to your Senate office is a BFD,
big deal,
right? Yeah,
so
it is.
So what's his defense on this? I forgot. It slipped my mind.
And the whole thing, at the CNN town hall, Jamie, last night, Senator McCain there with Lindsey Graham was asked about Putin. I mean, no love lost here, but here's Senator McCain.
Let's know what Vladimir Putin is. He's a thug, he's a KGB agent, and he's a killer. And treat him as such. And what does he understand? Strength. That's why we have to rebuild our military, that's why, frankly, we are not doing enough to rebuild that military and its capabilities. So.
Yeah, we know he goes off the charts on that one.
Yes,
he always does. But on the first part of it about Putin, he nails it, right?
He does. He does nail it. And of course, this is what our intelligence agencies agree. Yeah. Remember, this is the man who used to run the KGB. This is the man who knows how to run agents, how to manipulate people like Donald Trump.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Mike Ussery, Theresa Ghilarducci, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us. Support the americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.